IDW Sonic Comic Issue 45. It starts out with Amy leaving her pink car to go to Tails' house. Isn't Amy supposed to be 12? I guess she was allowed to learn how to drive because she's a hero. Which must be the same reason Tails is allowed to have a house at 8. But explaining that would be world building in a way I'd care about. Sonic asks Amy where she wants all the stuff he's carrying at once, since as usual, he's surprisingly strong. She says that in the trunk is fine, and thanks Tails for letting her borrow his camping gear. As it turns out, he cares enough to have camping gear. I guess it could make sense. It'd be for the same reason people in real life do. It goes well with the hero's loving nature to contrast Robotnik. It still comes out of nowhere in the comics though. Maybe it'd come less out of nowhere if Robotnik was regularly trying to pollute places in this comic. So the heroes were regularly fixing that up. But it's at least a nice change of pace that the heroes want to go camping, so I can understand why it was written. I can't remember the Sonic characters ever doing that, outside of Sonic Boom, and that was only to compete with each other. So there was an extra bit of justification there. Amy asks if there's anything she can do to return the favor, and Tails says he needs detailed reviews of the equipment so that he can improve his prototypes with the feedback. I have to assume he's too busy to use the equipment and study it himself. Busy making things that matter. If not, there'd be no excuse for them still being prototypes he trusts to work for his friends. Sonic teases Amy for no reason about Tails using her as a guinea pig to test his prototypes. That felt forced. Amy assumes it'll be fine. I'm guessing it won't be, because otherwise they make a boring plot, so the writer would know better than to do that. But Sonic Boom got away with the heroes camping without Eggman bothering them. But that's how the show is. Sonic says the wildflowers in the zone park are great this time of year, and wonders if he should tag along. This uses them being a nature lover to contrast Eggman well all of a sudden. I remember him liking flowers in Sonic X. But did we really need to see this scene? I guess so. To more gently ease us into the fact that the heroes are suddenly going camping now. Because they never did that before. If the story just started with them camping, I'd be even more confused. Amy says they're doing it so she and the girls can just hang out. But they could just hang out at a mall or watch TV at each other's houses like normal people. Instead they're going camping? This feels kind of contrived. But compared to other plots, it's forgivable. Because people do go camping in real life. So I'm probably confused mostly because I never went camping and don't see the appeal. But the heroes aren't bothering to explain it to me. I'm guessing Sonic won't go camping with Amy, which normally you'd expect anyways, because since when does he go out of his way to hang out with Amy? Tails says that Sonic promised he'd play the new games from the ages with them this weekend, because he never played multiplayer mode. This feels like Sonic Boom because it's being referenced that the Sonic characters actually play video games like normal people, making them relatable. But clearly it'd feel better to see those two playing a game, and see the game, like in Sonic Boom. I'm assuming we're going to see the game. Instead we're just seeing a scene where the characters are just standing around and talking while nothing's really happening. Which gets more boring the longer I have to type about it because it seems like it's wasting my time. Once again, the comic never implied that the heroes play video games for fun, so this comes out of nowhere too. But it makes logical sense and adds to their characters. I can't imagine what else they do for fun together. Amy tells Sonic and Tails to have fun together, and we see Tangle and Amy in a van in a yellow tint, which at first made me think they were being spied on by a convenient camera from Eggman. Or it's just a flashback panel. But then why aren't the earlier panels in this ugly, washed out yellow tint? Tangle's somehow excited for something as inherently boring as camping, because being easily excited and wanting excitement is almost her only personality. At least she's displayed a full range of emotions. But still, spread the excitement out a little, like to Amy. And then it might be less annoying for the bored audience. It turns out Belle's in the van too, and she's cramped in there with all the stuff. Her being here is a pleasant surprise. Although having two characters whose only personality is being cautious is redundant. Jules shouldn't have been here then, because she's not going to contribute anything that someone else couldn't have. Tango wishes she brought a knife. I've never seen a character say that in innocent context. She just wants to call camping an adventure because she wants excitement. Then it cuts back to a few days ago, with Whisper opening a creaky door. Still with the art in an ugly, washed out way in more of a pink tint this time. Maybe if the story wasn't so boring, I'd feel more like giving the fact that they can't even get the coloring right a pass. But so far, nothing's actually happened that a Sonic fan should care about. So I'd like the art to be good to look at least. She walks in a garden and says it's for the best. Is she being written to arbitrarily try to abandon her friends because she assumes she'll get killed? That's weird because the Whisper miniseries was dedicated to her getting over this. So this is going back on her character development to force that to be a thing again. I guess it makes sense to write that because it was one of the only interesting things about her character that stood out. Sonic had this problem too in Fleetway and Archie at one point each, so that's not new, only her being quiet is. It can make sense because you don't just get over PTSD, but she was letting Tangle hang out with her just fine for 2 entire arcs before this. So I figured that trait of hers was moved on from. So, huh? Then Tangle startles her by asking her if she'd like to jog with her, because she somehow thinks she'd want that. At least that's trying to make her seem like more of a real person because she has a hobby. I bet this will only be in this issue though. Whisper finally explains that since Mimic is free, her presence is a liability, putting everyone else in danger. Yeah, duh. I'm glad she's being portrayed as smart enough to realize this potential problem on her own. I thought she wouldn't. I'm guessing Tangle will be an idiot and assume everything will be fine for no reason, because that's who she is. Surprisingly, Tangle doesn't say that, and just says that she just got here, and lets Whisper say that her place isn't with the Restoration and leave. She just let her leave? She didn't try to talk her out of it? That was out of character. It does make sense that an antisocial like Whisper wouldn't join Tangle on her camping trip though. But come to think of it, did we actually need to see that scene? It seems to have nothing to do with the plot. It's just a sad scene when it doesn't have to be sad that Whisper's on her own because she's being smart. Jewel says that Tangle got quiet all of a sudden. You'd think she wouldn't question it and would just be grateful for the quiet. She can't expect there to always be talking the entire drive. Tangle apologizes and unnecessarily lies that she was just thinking about restoration stuff instead of opening up to her own best friend. Haven't they been friends forever? Isn't that out of character too? Since when did she lie to people to avoid worrying them? She told Sonic when she was infected with the metal virus, even if she took a while. Jewel at least points out that it was hard for her to tear herself away from important work at the Restoration, which is relatable to me, as we see Tangle pulling her away from paperwork. So this is addressed. Still, if that paperwork needs to get done, why is she here? For a break, sure, but I have to assume it's just not so important that it can't wait for a few days. She does need a break for her own sake. Belle says sarcastically the word important, as we see a flashback where she's standing beside someone repairing a car from underneath. So she thinks she's not doing anything important, which is true, and will always be true. We already have Tails to be the engineer. I'd rather just see a text box saying later, instead of the art looking more yellow. Amy's disappointed because they end up going to a busy campground. Wait, they're actually heading for a dedicated campground? I always assumed they were just going to the woods. It could very easily just be the 4 of them. How did they screw this up? I didn't know they were deliberately heading for one place with trailers. Why would they ever go here? I thought the only camps that existed were camps for kids, which a kid had to enroll in for a lot longer than a few days. Suddenly there's a camp for teenagers and adults. I don't know, maybe that is true and I just haven't heard of one before. Or maybe that's just a Mobius thing. At least this is different from that episode of Sonic Boom then. But it means they have less leeway to just up and leave if they're needed as heroes somewhere else in an emergency because they have a reservation here and they won't get their deposit back. I thought Amy just wanted to hang out with her friends. Why would she go to a place with a bunch of other people? Wait, shouldn't it have been immediately obvious to her that Belle would be gawked at for being a puppet girl the whole time and made miserable? Wouldn't any empathy indicate that to her? Wouldn't Bella have warned her about that? So it really is contrived that she's going here. The bear of the park says that since the meadow virus infected this whole region through the winter, and meadow plants don't absorb water, the whole park is bone dry, and set to go up on fire now. So fire is only allowed in marked areas temporarily. It's impressive that the writer thought of this. I wonder if this is only written as foreshadowing to there being a fire. I hope not. It would be harder to take the story seriously if it had the clumsy foreshadowing of SDC that was clearly only written to be foreshadowing. Then he's surprised by someone who has an orange wisp, and he tells him that he told him that if he came to work with him, there has to be no fire. And yet the kid's laughing about it. So is that the thing that's going to set the place on fire? Because the kid was dumb enough to take the fire wisp to this place just for that one time when he'd startle his father with it? I wouldn't appreciate another plot that only happens because of an idiot ball. At least that's a creative excuse for a fire instead of it being Eggman doing something wrong again. Still, the story feels like a waste of time. Literally. What is the appeal of seeing them go camping? I want to see them do hero stuff. That's why I read Sonic stories. I went back to all of Sonic the comic recently and saw a lot of it again, so I know I missed that. I just remembered we saw Amy camping in Sonic X2. It was so forgettable that I only remembered it now. I know for a fact that I would rather read the Sally miniseries' first issue than this. At least it has Sally doing freedom fighter stuff. And at least the story is relatively harmless so far, to the point where I quickly started wondering who wrote it. Jewel says while holding blue paper that half of this is geometry equations. Tangle accidentally hits her with a long pole while turning. Amy complains that it's apparently just like Tails to pack all these high-tech bells and whistles that give me no indication of their purpose and not the essentials. Like matches. How is it just like Tails? I know he's about technology, but he's still supposed to be smart. Then Belle reveals she has a match finger. Which just reminds me of the fact that the heroes were just told that this place is bone dry, and they have to be careful with the fire. I'm willing to bet that the match feature wasn't one of the features of her fingers that she showed off to Tails earlier when she showed off all of her finger compartments. In which case, I wonder how this can fit in her hand. She is naturally scared of the match because she's made of wood. Belle says sorry because Amy wants everyone to have a good time, and Amy tells her it's not her fault and reassures her that she's got a trick up her sleeve. Then I'm annoyed because it just cuts ahead instead of explaining what that is. If she had a match, she wouldn't care that there's no matches. I wish I saw her create fire with sticks. Tangles asked how pitching the tent went. I guess because Amy can't think of anything else to talk about with her. Tangle burns her marshmallows because she's been distracted all day. Because she didn't simply tell Jewel what she was worried about right away, like a real friend, this gave the writer an excuse to waste her time with this, so that wasn't worth it. Amy said she'll get the night started. At first I thought she was holding red playing cards, but instead they're tarot cards. I like that that's being brought back, and I just have to assume that the only reason it was completely absent until now is that I had no reason to factor into a plot because it wasn't useful. She's an expert practitioner at them and says that these cards led her to Sonic. So, that's still canon to her backstory, when that came from a Sonic CD manual, and that's a classic Sonic thing. What was said about the writers not being allowed to have the classic era as a part of the heroes' past in any way? The tarot cards were exclusive to the classic gaming. One element is allowed to sneak past Sega, and yet they can't have Bang around? I would have been more impressed by this panel if I hadn't been spoiled on this recently. But instead I went into the issue wondering when this would happen. I do think it's impressive that the panel managed to make it look like she was shuffling the cards by having them look blurry. But obviously it would be more interesting if she was actually literally psychic. Then we briefly see a panel with Sonic sneezing, which humanizes them. I can't remember him ever doing that before. And I'll take any new thing I can get in this comic. Amy says that through these cards she can predict the future, which just makes me wonder why she never did this for anyone else. She could have predicted Eggman's next plans and been the excuse for why the heroes were always there to stop him in time, being more useful. So it's a good thing Jules written to explain that it's more about presenting someone with an open-ended prediction, and then they'll associate it with their own life experiences. It's giving the audience a valuable lesson, so I wish it was a lot less vague about this to thoroughly convince anyone. But at least this gives Jewel more personality by being the smart doubter. Still, if these tarot cards are literally that big, I have to wonder how they taught Amy to go to Little Planet in particular. Amy shows her an emerald card, saying that it signifies strength and leadership, as we see the Master Emerald on it, because the emerald unifies the Chaos Emeralds. So the people who made the tarot cards must have found out about the Master Emerald, when it was a secret until Eggman discovered it and tried to take it. And then I guess the reason the general public found out about it was that Knuckles kept asking NPCs in Station Square if they've seen any Master Emerald shards, as their dialogue implied. Or, the makers of these cards were the ancient echidnas right before they tried to charge at the Master Emerald? But they're a hunter-gatherer, warmongering Mayan tribe. Tikal discovered the emeralds before all of them. Did she first make the cards? Or the makers of the cards were literally psychic since they knew about the secret Master Emerald in an inaccessible floating island? That needs to be explained. Well, it is created that there's a brand new tarot card associated with a Sonic game element for this, that could have not been come up with. It actually gets confusing because of this continuity error. Tarot cards are supposed to be a long time thing, right? But these cards either can't predate SA1, which isn't true since they're from Sonic CD's backstory, or they're 8,000 years old from Mayan culture. Someone should point out that they have to be really recent then. She could have easily only picked a card that went well with Jewel by coincidence. For once, Tangle's the cautious one, asking what if it turns out to be a future they won't like. Which only makes sense because she's busy missing Whisper and worrying that Mimic's gonna come after her. Otherwise, it's confusing for the character entirely defined by being an excited optimist. Again, we see a brand new tarot card for the Sonic series, the Chow's Fruit, which can mean many things, including a showdown, moral dilemma, or partnership. The fact that it can mean many things just adds credence to Jules' point earlier. It's not predicting anything really specific. And for some strange reason, the card makers couldn't just have 3 separate cards for all of these things, because it'd be more likely to be right by coincidence this way. Also, Chow have many different kinds of fruit. Which fruit is it? I'm guessing the scene is only here for foreshadowing, and the cards will be right. Can't stuff happen without the scene? I'd rather the plot actually progress though. At least in the Sally miniseries, we saw characters blowing up Eggman's energy substations. That felt like it was important to see, and is what I come to Sonic for. And wouldn't it have been educational to see actual tarot cards? At least once? The writer could have looked them up on the internet in seconds, saving us the trouble. Instead, I feel like I'm missing out, being cheated. Tangle says this doesn't sound familiar because they don't get a lot of excitement around Restoration HQ, but Jill's worried since she's away from it. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense if Amy did bring playing cards? Because then they could play a game together instead of being worried and depressed by future predictions that are too vague to actually be useful. Making Amy's hobby worthless because it does nothing but waste time with unnecessary foreshadowing. It's not the kind of foreshadowing that would make the future make more sense. Somehow, Bella asks if the cards will work on robots. Then Amy's optimistic, so I start to wonder if the card's gonna foreshadow death for her. And the fact that Amy looks horrified doesn't help. Now I'm wondering if this is foreshadowing the writer killing Belle off, like because Flynn mandated it. Maybe the reason I jumped to this conclusion immediately is because I know someone was worried about him wanting to do that. I wouldn't have worried about that because she's a harmless, nice girl, so I can't see why he would want that. But I don't know why I had faith in that writer after all the times I was baffled and disappointed, unable to understand why he wrote things the way he did. Then the writing gets really forced, because when Amy says that's fine, Belle puts her hand on her chest in a panic, and it just so happens that that card in particular gets sent into the fire, when there was no reason for Belle to have touched her chest, instead of simply trying to grab the one card from her hand. Now I'm actually angry. Now the writing is infuriatingly forced. This only happens to force Amy to get away with not telling Belle the truth, like an honest friend would. I can understand her trying to reassure someone scared, but it's clearly not working anyways. We didn't even get to see what the card looked like. I guess the writer got too lazy. Yeah, maybe don't have the plot insult my intelligence and then expect me not to get mad at it. It could have easily been written that Belle would have seen the card. Was this even a worthwhile part of the story? We could have just had it reference that she still likes tarot cards in one panel. This is like when Sonic X foreshadowed Cosmo dying because a fortune teller said it would happen. It could have been removed just fine, and then the death would have more impact because it'd be a surprise, not completely given away early for no reason. Now the only surprise left will be when it'll happen. The writer doesn't care about Belle's fans at all, if they're even considering doing this. Jill wants to sleep early, and we see that Belle's eyes creepily glow in the dark. At least not as much as they could be glowing. But I didn't expect that. Then after what the card was about, she takes the risk of separating from her friends at night, without telling them where she's going. If she's planning on just going home, there's no reason for her not to say that. Or at least leave a note, instead of risking them thinking that she was kidnapped after she'd go missing. I get the idea that she's leaving because she's worried that if she stays with them, she'll die. And she figures the future can be changed, and was only going off of what would happen if she stayed with them. I wish she explained that instead of me feeling like I'm just assuming things based on her taking a walk in the woods at night for no reason, because the writer wants the plot that way. She sees a bush shaped like a hedgehog's head. I feel like that'd be impossible unless Sonic specifically pruned it to be that way on a whim. If it's literally just that the artist felt like drawing it that way, then it still feels sloppy to not ever explain this. If the bush was shaped like that because the person rustling the bushes was Sonic instead of Mimic, then the bush would make sense. She gets scared by some rustling of the bushes, and tries to get out her flashlight. Somehow, she can only get out a match. She hopes the person will be nice. Why doesn't she just take off running right away, after Amy predicted her death? I wish she explained that she's just so considerate that she'd rather see what the danger is so that she could warn her friends about it, even if it endangers herself. She gets startled by a motobug and smacks her head on a rock when she falls over. That knocks her out, even though she's a robot. She wouldn't have a soft brain to rattle and easily damage. And I'm pretty sure wood is harder than skin. Whatever. I guess this can make sense. But it'd be more believable for an organic, that's for sure. Amy smells of fire at 5 AM. Why did it take until 5 AM for her to wake up to this? Wouldn't the fire have spread all the way to her by now? Wasn't Belle walking around at midnight at latest? I don't get the impression that Belle took a gigantic journey. I don't know how fast fire spreads, so this is taking advantage of us not knowing that. She's still in a forest. So, based on what I'm seeing, a fire got started because Belle somehow couldn't find a flashlight and lit a match for light in a place she was clearly told was flammable, even though she apparently had a flashlight feature to begin with. I don't remember that. And you'd think that if her eyes glow in the dark, she wouldn't need a match for extra light. She's a robot. Wouldn't she be made able to see in the dark? Why not? Eggman already cared enough to put a whole bunch of different features in her fingers. If the fire started around Belle because of her match, which is the only information I have available right now, the only reason she wouldn't be burnt up and killed is if the motobug managed to get under her and carry her away to Eggman or Starline time. I guess it did. It's too early to kill her off after that foreshadowing just happened a scene ago. I guess I feel kinda attached. One of the civilians running ahead looked like Reboot Sally. Two cars slightly crash into each other, and Amy worries about people panicking making it worse, which is more realistic. Then for drama's sake, the bear's kid isn't answering him. I don't know why, because you'd think he'd be staying close by him. It's 5 AM! That's too early for a normal kid to already be awake. Sure, he's apparently always wandering off into the woods, but that doesn't make it make sense. It's 5 AM! This is contrived! Why is there an extra bit of drama that the kid might be lost in the burning woods? It's too early for that to be taken seriously. There's already a fire, which I figured would happen 2 issues later in the climax of the arc. The fire only has half the emotional impact because it was already given away that it would happen, which wasn't necessary because we already know that forests are flammable. I'm pretty sure the forest would have gone up in flames even if it wasn't bone dry. Tango volunteers to go look for the kid alone, while everyone else wants to get people to safety. Amy thanks Tangle, and the story ends without even telling us that Belle had taken a Starline yet. Why does it have to end just when it got interesting? This issue is by Evan Stanley, as I guessed at first because it was so harmless for the most part. If I had known that the next arc was going to be by her, I wouldn't have waited so long to go back to IDW. So much of my time was wasted with boredom where nothing actually happened, and it was just a mundane story where the Sonic characters go to a campground out of nowhere instead of being heroes like I come to Sonic for. And they aren't constantly doing camp activities to keep my interest either. They just go there. And then Amy wasted my time with the tarot card scene that was only there for unnecessary vague foreshadowing. Most of this issue actually felt like a waste of time. I feel robbed because of it. It didn't need to completely give away that Belle's gonna die before it happens. That just ruins the surprise and makes me mad. Of course the audience will be less likely to accept a plot point that gives negative feelings from it if they're just being warned about it instead of seeing it happen. How can I not have a condescending tone when talking about a comic like this? I was tolerating the boring story until the point where it forced the card to fall into the fire. Then I was just frustrated how contrived it was that she couldn't even see the card that Amy was scared of. She can't even get that? Why bother doing that when her reaction already gave it away? Even the premise felt contrived. Just not as much as most other stuff that's contrived. It could be realistic that the heroes would want to go to a campground for the same reason others do in real life, but they never do that. There's been no indication they do that. And why on earth would they go to a campground instead of just camping out in the woods together so that they can go home at any time? They want to hang out with each other. It literally just feels like the only reason they went here was because the writer wanted that for the plot. It's not like there's a Chaos Emerald here and they detected it. That feels Sonic-like and significant. But I guess the story overall was harmless. But I honestly don't feel like it was because it was mostly boring and pointless. The only reason I think it's harmless is that the art looks harmless and the tone was deceptively lighthearted for the most part. And it took until the middle of the story for me to get mad at it. But it's not automatically good just because it's not as bad as some other stories. How's a boring, unfulfilling story good? Nobody wants to see Amy roasting marshmallows, and that's literally all they did camping-wise when they read a Sonic comic. Sonic characters can do mundane things, like have a picnic. They do that a lot in Arch Sonic, but that's more suited to a few panels, not an entire plot. At least the Sonic Boom episode had a ton of variety in what the heroes did in the woods. I expected another story where they went to go bother Eggman. When I was coming back to this comic, I was thinking it'd be another scenario like 2 arcs ago where they were in his base for multiple issues, because that feels significant. And I'm used to this comic having a heavy focus on action, for better or for worse.